Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. When the queen drank liquor, King Puranjan also engaged in drinking. When the queen dined, he used to dine with her. And when she chewed, King Puranjan used to chew along with her. When the queen sang, he also sang. Similarly, when the queen cried, he also cried. And when the queen laughed, he also laughed. When the queen talked loosely, he also talked loosely. And when the queen walked, the king walked behind her. When the queen would stand still, the king would stand still. And when the queen would lie down in bed, he would also follow and lie down with her. When the queen sat, he would also sit. And when the queen heard something, he would follow her to hear the same thing. When the queen saw something, the king would also look at it. And when the queen smelled something, the king would follow her to smell the same thing. When the queen touched something, the king would also touch it. And when the dear queen was lamenting, the poor king also had to follow her in lamentation. In the same way, when the queen felt enjoyment, he also enjoyed. And again, when the queen was satisfied, the king also felt satisfaction. Forward by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada. The mind is a place where the self is situated, where the mind is controlled by the intelligence. The living entity situated within the heart follows the intelligence. The intelligence here is depicted as a queen, and the soul and the mental control follows the material intelligence just like the king follows his wife. The conclusion is that material intelligence is a cause of bondage of the living entity. The point is that one has to take spiritual intelligence to come out of this entanglement. In the life of Maharaja Amrish, we find the great Maharaj first engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Kṛṣṇa. In this way, his intelligence became purified. Maharaja Amrish also used his other senses in the service of the Lord. He engaged his eyes in seeing the deity in the temple, nicely decorated with flowers. He engaged his sense of smell by smelling the flowers, and he engaged his legs by walking to the temple. His hands were engaged in cleansing the temple, and his ears were engaged in hearing about Kṛṣṇa. His tongue was engaged in two ways, in speaking about Kṛṣṇa and in taking prasad offered to the deity. Materialistic persons who are under the full control of material intelligence cannot perform all these activities. Thus, consciously and unconsciously, they become entangled by the dictation of material intelligence. This fact is summarized in the following verse. Since there are many visitors and irregular attendance of the Bhagavatam class, we'll just give a little background to what we are reading, because some of you may not be able to follow what is being said, and some of you may misunderstand the Bhagavatam when you hear this translation. We are reading the story of a king called Puranjan. Actually, long ago, there was a king called King Prachina Bharisha. This king had many sons that he had sent to perform austerities. These sons were later on known as the Prachetas. The sons were fortunate enough to receive guidance from Lord Shiva. And for 10,000 years, they stood in water and chanted a mantra that was given to them by Lord Shiva. And what did that mantra glorify? Kṛṣṇa, the Supreme Lord. So, there is so much evidence to show that even Lord Shiva tells his followers to glorify. So the Prachetas had captured the attention of the Lord as a result of the austerities they performed for 10,000 years. While the sons were performing austerities, the father was engaged in performing various fruitive activities. Fruitive activity is also called karma kanda. Now, fruitive activities are superior to the atheistic position, where one denies the existence of God, but they are subordinate to the process of pure devotional service. At best, by fruitive activities, you can be elevated to higher planets, but there again, you can only stay for a limited period, and then you have to return again to the earthly planet. Therefore, Narottama Das Thakur says, performing fruitive activities is like drinking poison from a golden cup. Poison, whether you drink from a clay cup, golden cup, paper cup, is the same effect, isn't it? So fruitive activities is not our ultimate goal. So the king was engaged in performing karma kanda activities. He used to go hunting also. So Narada Muni appeared on the scene and took great compassion upon the king. That is the nature of a Vaishnava. He's very compassionate. A Vaishnava has many qualities, some of which are, he's very forgiving. A Vaishnava doesn't believe in tit for tat, an eye for an eye. In the material world, we have this philosophy of tit for tat, am I right? You do something wrong to me, I'll do twice as wrong to you, teach you a real lesson. So Vaishnava is forgiving, and we see that in the wonderful example of Yudhishthira Maharaj, that after the battle of Kurukshetra had finished, he very magnanimously approached his uncle Dhritarashtra and said, "You lost all your children and grandchildren in the war. I apologize, and I want to give you this nice palace to live in." What a glorious way to treat somebody who tried to kill you. So Vaishnava is very forgiving, and he's also very compassionate. Compassion means bringing one closer to God. There's a material definition of compassion, and there's a spiritual definition of compassion. The material definition of compassion is give people lollipops, give them material facilities, medical facilities, free education, mass marriages, and so on. But the spiritual concept of compassion is giving people knowledge by which we can become free from the cycle of birth and death. That is the highest benediction you can give someone. Knowledge by which one comes closer to God. Knowledge by which one gives up its so-called attachment to sinful activities. So Narada Muni is very compassionate. Last night I was giving you a story of Brigari. He's a spiritual master of many powerful personalities and even sinful personalities. So Narada Muni appeared on the scene and told the king, "Why are you engaged in fruitive activities in this karma kanda? You are a slave of your mind and senses. What are you going to get by performing fruitive activities?" And then Narada Muni said, the real mission of life should be to free oneself from all miseries of life and to find real happiness. So these are the two goals we should try to achieve. One goal is to free oneself from all material miseries. And as any sane man can testify, material life is nothing but full of miseries. Prabhupada used to give us an example. He used to say that in the olden days, the system of punishment was they would take a criminal deep in the Black Sea, make him dip his head under water. And then just to make sure that he didn't drown, they would pull him out of water for a few seconds. So he would be, and then again, duck his head under water. That was an ancient, crude system of punishment. So that's exactly what material life is. In the middle of grievances and miseries, you get some breaths of little so-called enjoyment. And you take it for granted. This is what I'm going to have always. So Narada Muni said, the twofold goals should be, one should be to free oneself from all miseries. And the other should be to experience real enjoyment, happiness, to achieve real happiness. And real happiness is spiritual happiness. Rupa Goswami in Nectar of Devotion discusses 3 different types of happiness. One, Rupa Goswami discusses happiness that you can obtain by material activities. Happiness that you can get by material activities, they have a beginning and an end, isn't it? Let's say you're a very handsome or beautiful person, very handsome man or beautiful woman, and you have unrestricted access to sense enjoyment and changing partners and so on. So how long can you do that? It's going to come to an end today, tomorrow. Let's say you become a powerful president, a dictator, or a king of a country. How long can you rule? 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years? Let's say you become a very big sports star or movie star. You're a sports star and movie star, virtually like demigods in Kali-yuga. They attract such a huge following, especially in countries like India. So, let's say you become a big sports star or movie star. How long is your fame going to ride? 10, 20, 30, 40 years the most? So Rupa Goswami says, material happiness doesn't matter to what means you obtain. It has a beginning and an end. And anyone can see that. Then he talks about the happiness that you can get through the impersonal Brahman realization process. He says that even if that is multiplied 1 trillion-fold, still it is only a fraction of the happiness that you can get by spiritual activities. And then he goes on to say that spiritual happiness is real happiness because spiritual happiness never ends. Spiritual happiness, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, is always increasing. Ananda Muni Vardhanam. So then Narada Muni gave to the king an allegorical story. Actually, Narada Muni was describing the story of King Prachinabarhisha. But he didn't call him, he didn't say, I'm telling you your life story. Narada Muni was self-realized, so he knew about the king's activities. But he said, once upon a time, there was a king, and his name was King Puranjan. So Puranjan means one who lives within the body. It also means the king of the body. So we are all actually King Puranjans because we are the owners of the body and we have the freedom to use the body positively or negatively. Just like as a citizen of any country, you have the option to either be a law-abiding citizen or be a defiant citizen, isn't it? So we're all King Puranjans. And so Narada Muni here is giving the story of King Puranjan. How does King Puranjan engage in performing fruitive activities, hunting, how he was slave of his wife and the senses. So here in the translation of the 5 verses, you read that whatever the queen did, the king followed her. When the queen was drinking, the king would drink. When the queen dined, and he would dine. So what does this really represent? And sometimes someone may say, what type of examples is the Bhagavatam giving? It looks like a mundane example. If you just read this one verse in isolation, then it looks like a mundane verse, isn't it? And then you would say, how can this mundane verse fit into the topmost scripture of the planet? So therefore, you have to know the background and the context within which Narada Muni is speaking this verse. Narada Muni is the speaker of this verse. So, over here, the queen is compared to the intelligence. What a beautiful way of presenting, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the analogies in the Bhagavatam, they're uncomparable. So here, the intelligence is symbolized by queen, and the mind is symbolized by the king. So the king represents the mind, and the queen represents the intelligence. So here we saw that whatever the queen did, the king did. Isn't it? The king just blindly followed the queen. She drank, he drank, she sat, he sat. She was lamenting, he was lamenting. She was happy, he was happy. So this is very nicely explained by Prabhupada in the purport, that intelligence symbolizes, the queen symbolizes the intelligence, and the king in this story symbolizes the mind. So the mind follows the intelligence. If the intelligence is correctly situated, then the mind will be correctly situated. If the intelligence is not correctly situated, then the mind will also not be situated properly. Higher than the senses are the self, higher than the mind, and above the mind is the... Now we can see in our day-to-day lives that usually we end up following the intelligence. For example, you see some nice product in a store, and your intelligent mind says, pocket it, no one's watching. The cameras don't seem to be watching either. These days, you don't need detection to watch. The cameras are watching everything, and everyone's watching the cameras. One man watches the camera. So anyway, you may say, no one's watching. Let me pocket this nice product in my shopping bag. But then, that's what the mind is saying. But the intelligence says, no, it's risky. Someone could be watching you. So then you surrender and you don't do it, isn't it? The mind says, it's a nice day today, I don't feel like going to work. Then the intelligence says, no, if you don't go to work, you may get fired. You won't get a salary. So then the mind says, okay, I better do what the intelligence says. So the intelligence should be so situated that it can control the mind and the senses. In the Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, Arjuna asked Kṛṣṇa, how is one compelled into sinful acts even unwillingly? Many times we know that what we're doing is wrong, but we still get captured and we do it. So Arjuna wanted to know, how is one compelled into sinful acts even unwilling? So Kṛṣṇa then replied, it is lust only, the all-devouring enemy of the living entity, which is always burning like fire and is never satiated, never satisfied. Then Kṛṣṇa goes on to explain, where is this enemy lust situated? And where is it situated? In the mind, then senses and intelligence. Kṛṣṇa says this enemy is situated in the senses, mind and intelligence. Then Kṛṣṇa says, slay this enemy with a weapon of knowledge. So, with the weapon of knowledge means destroy this enemy with knowledge. How do you destroy darkness? With light. So how do you destroy ignorance? With knowledge. And how do you obtain knowledge? By reading. You obtain knowledge by hearing and reading. Therefore, hearing is essential for spiritual life. Like yesterday we were lecturing from 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, where Śrīla Goswami says that 4 things are necessary for developing love of God. One is to hear, one is to chant, then is to meditate, and then is to worship the Supreme Lord. So hearing is very important. Unfortunately, many of us do not take advantage of the hearing facility. We should hear and hear attentively, not just hear physically. Hear attentively. Just like the Bhagavatam says, Nasta prayesha madesha nityam bhagavad sevaya. Bhagavati tamashloke bhakti bhavati naisiti. Bhagavatam talks about attentive hearing and attentive chanting. Both are necessary. So, if we hear the philosophy from the right sources, then we can destroy the power of ignorance. Maya is strong, but fortunately, it is weaker than Krishna. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Devesha gunamai mama maya dhurateya. Mame prapadante maya metam tarantite. That this illusory energy of mind is very difficult to overcome. So someone may say, Krishna says it is difficult to overcome, so why the hell are we trying to overcome it? Let us all surrender. What's the use of, fighting a battle that you know you're going to lose? But then Krishna goes on to say, but if you surrender to me, then you can overcome. So, the mind tends to follow the intelligence. And if the intelligence is correctly situated, then the mind can also be brought under control. But if our intelligence is bewildered and wrongly situated, then the mind and senses also cannot be brought in control. The general tendency is that the mind follows the intelligence. Now Prabhupada says in the purport, the conclusion is that material intelligence is the cause of bondage of the living entity. So people have intelligence, but unfortunately the intelligence is misplaced. You can't deny that there is intelligence, isn't it? But even if there is intelligence, who do you give credit to? Who? Krishna, isn't it? God gives us intelligence in man. It's not that there is a special formula of medicine that you buy from a drugstore and then you consume that and your intelligence increases. Sometimes in India they promote these shaman brushes and say, this is going to increase the memory, improve your intelligence. It's all bogus. The point is, intelligence is a gift of God. And that intelligence, and people have intelligence, so they can do various miracles. But, in one way, if you look at it, the achievements of the scientists are like miracles. If you analyze various scientific inventions, discoveries, and improvements that are taking place, they're all miracles. Who could ever think? You can go to a CT scan and you can see everything inside your body right in front of you, right? Whoever dreamt 20 years ago, you'd be able to see the inner organs of your body right in front of you. And even if you look at the progress in the computers and a small chip the size of the nail you throw away, they can store so many items. Previously, when we used to buy Prabhupada's tapes, you needed a whole almara to fill Prabhupada's 1,000 tapes, You had all the. Now you get a small MP3s, and it's such a small thing, you have to have the whole thing, 1,000 tapes compressed. I remember previously you had to buy these Prabhupada tapes, and you had to buy them from the archives. You needed a whole almara to fill them with 1,000 tapes. Now you can get all those 1,000 tapes in an MP3 the size of a matchbox. The size of a matchbox. And you can have everything compressed over there. Amazing, isn't it? And so you can't deny that the scientists or the technicians are empowered by the Lord. They have intelligence given to them by Kṛṣṇa. You can't say they're idiots. They're definitely very smart people. So, but this intelligence coming from whom? Kṛṣṇa. But we have the freedom to use the intelligence correctly or incorrectly. And what is being stated by Prabhupada here is that material intelligence is a cause of bondage for the living entity. Point is that one has to take the spiritual intelligence to come out of this entanglement. So what is being stated here is that material intelligence is the cause of bondage, and spiritual intelligence is the cause of liberation. Just like milk becomes the cause of a bad stomach, but the same milk, when it is consumed in the form of yogurt, it cures the bad stomach, isn't it? So, the material intelligence, Prabhupada says, is the cause of bondage. Spiritual intelligence is the cause of getting out of the entanglement or freedom. So we need to cultivate spiritual intelligence. And spiritual intelligence does not get cultivated just by getting initiated. Spiritual intelligence doesn't get cultivated just by having a bead bag or tilak. Spiritual intelligence gets cultivated by endeavoring, especially taking advantage of the Shravanam Kirtanam process. The Shravanam Kirtanam process is a medium through which we can cultivate spiritual intelligence. Therefore, this process has to be a top priority. A top priority has to be this, to concentrate on this process of Shravanam and Kirtanam. And then this spiritual intelligence will develop. And if spiritual intelligence develops, then what follows? The mind comes under control. And the mind comes under control, then what follows? The senses come under control. And the senses come under control, then what follows? Spiritual life becomes easy. Otherwise, the intelligence is, if it is so maturely situated, then the mind will always gravitate in those activities, and the senses naturally have a tendency to gravitate in those activities. Therefore, the spiritual intelligence must be controlled. Now, Prabhupada in the purport gives the example of Maharaja Amrish. Maharaja Amrish's story can be read in the 9th canto of the Bhagavatam. And about Maharaja Amrish, you read how he was a God-conscious king, and a king who believed in engaging all his senses in service to the Lord. Today we have replaced monarchy with materialistic rulers. They may be kings, prime ministers, presidents, etc. But do you see any level of God consciousness in them? No. Do you see any ruler like, falling in the footsteps of Amrish Maharaj? No. You may have heads of state or rulers of certain Islamic countries that may be a little more religious, but in private life they do all nonsense also. So, but you don't have any exemplary rulers on the planet. But King Amrish was an exemplary ruler. He engaged his mind meditating at the lotus feet of the Lord. So we need to engage the mind positively or negatively. And if we engage them positively, then we engage them in thinking of the Lord, thinking of the Lord's instructions, etc. And he used his feet to walk to the temple of the Lord. Now, in today's environment, where distances are very far and wide, you may not be able to walk to the temple, so you can use your feet to drive your car to the temple. Or you can use your feet to cycle down to the temple, or ride your scooter to the temple. Like in India, we get a lot of devotees in scooters and motorcycles. So you can use your feet to transport you to the temple. Doesn't matter what the means is, even if you pilot a plane. Then he uses other senses also in serving the Lord. He used his eyes. What did he use his eyes for? Seeing the deity of the Lord. The eyes, when purified, want to see something connected to the Lord. And when the eyes are not impure, contaminated, then you want to see pornography, then you want to see something obscene, because that's what most people like to see. And on the internet, more than half the sites are related to pornography, because they get the maximum hits, because the eyes are contaminated. And when the eyes are purified, then the eyes want to see the form of the Lord. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is very nicely explained that those eyes that do not see the form of the Lord, those eyes are comparable to the plumes of a peacock feather. In a peacock feather, there are plumes, They look like eyes. But if you were to close your eyes and put those in the front, will you be able to see? No. They look like eyes, but they don't have the capacity to see. So Bhagavatam says, those eyes that do not see the form of the Lord, they are like plumes of a peacock feather. Those eyes have no value if you don't see the form of the Lord with those eyes. So here it says, he used his sense of smell in smelling the flowers and tulsi leaves offered to the Lord. We offer flowers to the Lord in Arti, then the flower gets circulated to the devotees in the audience, isn't it? Because we have a tendency to smell. So what should we smell? Tulsi leaves and flowers offered to the Lord. In the material world, people are very attracted to smelling fragrances, am I right? So therefore, you have in all these department stores, the first item is what? The fragrance, perfumes stall, isn't it? Because people love to buy perfumes to attract people's attention. So, but Maharaja Amrish used a sense of smell to smell the flowers offered to the Lord. And he used his hands to clean the temple of the Lord. Many times we go to the temple, we want to do some service, but we don't want to do some menial service. But Maharaja Amrish was a king and he was doing menial service, cleaning the temple of the Lord. Isn't that menial service? We'll give you a story on this in the evening lecture. He uses hands to clean the temple of the Lord. So when you go to a temple of the Lord and you have to do some menial service, don't feel offended. Rather, you should feel privileged. Everyone in the material world wants to be a big boss. So if you want to be a big boss even in the temple of the Lord, that means you've made no advancement. That means you're still on the material platform like you were before you came to Kṛṣna consciousness. But if you're ready to come to the temple and do menial service, that's when you're making some advancement. Because in the material world, we all want to be a big boss. Sahib, they say, we all want to be a big boss. So if you come to the temple and you also want just to be a big boss, that means you haven't made any spiritual advancement. Look at Maharaj Amrish's example. Look at Maharaj Patapuja's example. He was sweeping the temple, the floor of the Lord. So when we come to the temple of the Lord, our mood of service should be, I want to do the most menial of all services. Maybe pot washer, or maybe a dishwasher, maybe a sweeper of the temple, because you're doing the service way in the temple of the Lord. And there are so many examples of exalted devotees who serve the Lord by doing very menial service in the temple of the Lord. Then he used his ears to hear subject matter being spoken about Kṛṣna. We have ears and they have a natural tendency to hear. We have a tongue and the natural tendency is to vibrate. Now the choice is ours, whether we vibrate spiritual subject matter or material subject matter. Material subject matter vibrated is called prajalpa. And spiritual subject matter, when it is vibrated, it's called Kṛṣna Katha. So our goal should be to engage in Kṛṣna Katha. It's Rupa Goswami says, Atyahara prayasasya prajalpa niyamagraha jan sangha shandolyam jan sadbir bhaktir vinashati. That devotional service get destroyed by engaging in certain activities, one of which is prajalpa or material thought. So Amrish Maharaj used his tongue to glorify the Lord and in tasting Kṛṣna Prasad. The tongue has two principal functions. One function of the tongue is to taste Kṛṣna Prasad. The other function of the tongue is to talk about the glories of the Lord. The tongue plays a major role in your spiritual endeavor. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has explained how the tongue, the belly, and the genitals are all in a straight line. If you can control your tongue, you can control your belly and your genitals. If you can't control your tongue, you can't control your belly or your genitals. And if you eat without restriction, if you don't have the strict principle of eating only prasad, then the food that you eat will affect your consciousness. The grains, for example, have a unique capacity to transmit to the eater the mentality of the person cooking it. Sometimes I hear devotees go to Pizza Hut and buy a vegetarian pizza, and they say, "Oh, it's wonderful." It's not wonderful. You're eating. You may buy from Pizza Hut a vegetarian pizza, but it's cooked right in the same oven where they cook a meat pizza, and it's cooked with the same person who has a contaminated consciousness of cooking all day something with meat. So just because it doesn't have a slice of meat on its head doesn't make it bona fide. The point is that the consciousness of the person cooking affects the consciousness of the person consuming it. So therefore, our standard should be that we take Kṛṣna Prasad. Now you may say, but what do? I have to work outside and sometimes I have to go in business meetings and all that. So if you're ever in an extreme position, then you may do it what's practical. But the point is, but not do it because you like the pizza cooked by Pizza Hut. So the point, don't do it out of taste. And if you do that out of taste, then you take on all the karma that's going to accompany that nice taste. If you're ready to take on the karma, you can do virtually anything. You can go and rob a bank if you're ready to go to jail. No one's going to stop you. You can attempt to assassinate anyone if you want to, as long as you're ready to go to jail. So the point is, if you act contrary to scriptures, then you also have to pay the price. So Maharaj Amrish used his tongue in vibrating the glories of the Lord and in eating Kṛṣna Prasad. So Prabhupada says in the concluding lines of the purport that materialistic persons who are fully under the control of material intelligence cannot perform all these activities. So yes, you cannot perform all these activities if your consciousness is contaminated, if your intelligence is not correctly situated. Therefore, spiritual association, especially the process of Shravanam Kirtanam, is a medium through which we purify our intelligence, and with purified intelligence, we can discriminate. It is often said that purified intelligence is compared to a sharp blade. If you have a sharp blade, then you can cut anything easily, isn't it? And if you have a rusted blade, you really have to struggle. So we can sharpen our intelligence by regularly hearing the holy name, regularly hearing the philosophy. This is the medium through which we sharpen our intelligence, and we sharpen intelligence, we can control the mind and the senses. So to summarize the verse, over here, it is being described how the king was following the queen. In other words, the queen represents intelligence, and the king represents the mind. So the mind follows the intelligence. So therefore, we have to situate our intelligence correctly so that the mind and the senses also are controlled. What a beautiful analogy Narada Muni is giving over here, isn't it? To make us understand how the mind follows the intelligence. He gives so many points in these 5 verses to show how whatever the intelligence will decide, the mind follows. The mind is a slave of the intelligence. Therefore, what we need to do really is sharpen our intelligence, and devotional service in the association of devotees helps us to sharpen our intelligence. Hare Krishna.